Webb was 73 years old and had owned the same Harley Davidson since 1989. That bike wasn't just chrome and engine. It was the last piece of himself he'd kept after 50 years of living hard, loving harder, and losing almost everything that mattered. His granddaughter Emma was 18, brilliant, and had gotten into UC Berkeley with a full academic scholarship. The problem? Housing. Books and living expenses would cost $40,000 she didn't have. Marcus's pension from 30 years as a factory worker wouldn't stretch that far. One Tuesday morning, he walked into a dealership with the keys in his trembling hand and sold the Harley for $38,000. He didn't tell Emma. He didn't tell anyone. He just left a check on her pillow with a note that read, "Go change the world, kiddo. I'll be fine." What Marcus didn't know was that his Harley wasn't just any bike. It belonged to a legacy. Decades of weekend runs with the Iron Brothers Motorcycle Club. And when word spread through the network that old Marcus Webb had let that machine go for love, something shifted in the brotherhood. 100 riders decided that a man who would sacrifice his last dream for his granddaughter's future deserved to ride again. The morning light cut through the dealership windows like a knife, catching dust motes that floated aimlessly above the showroom floor. Marcus Webb sat on his Harley for the last time, his weathered hands gripping the handlebars that had carried him through 3 decades of living. His knuckles were mapped with scars, factory burns, rope cuts, the small wounds of a man who'd worked with his hands his entire life. 73 years old, and he was saying goodbye to the only thing that still felt like freedom. The Harley was a 1989 Heritage Softail, midnight blue with silver accents that caught the sun like promises he'd made to himself as a younger man. Marcus had bought it the year after his wife died, back when the grief was so thick he could barely breathe. That bike had saved him, not from dying, but from living dead. Every weekend ride through the desert outside Phoenix had reminded him that he was still alive, still capable of feeling the wind, the road, the pure rush of motion. Hook. Subscribe to see how one old man's sacrifice would unite an entire motorcycle brotherhood. He turned the key. The engine rumbled to life, that familiar growl that had become more real to him than his own heartbeat. The salesman, a young kid with tattoos and a Bluetooth headset, stood by the office window, checking his phone. He wasn't interested in the emotional funeral happening 20 feet away. Marcus rode the bike one last time around the lot, slow, deliberate. He wasn't trying to be dramatic. This wasn't performance. This was a man saying goodbye to the last piece of his own story before he became just another grandfather. He thought about Emma. She'd called him last week, her voice thin with worry through the phone speaker. "Grandpa, I got in UC Berkeley. Full ride." He'd heard the but she didn't say. "But I can't afford to live there." Marcus had spent 3 nights running the numbers. His pension, $4,200 a month. His savings, $12,000 meant for his own funeral. Emma's gap, $40,000 minimum. He'd spent the 4th night thinking about the Harley. The bike came to a stop in front of the dealership entrance. Marcus cut the engine. The silence that followed felt like betrayal. He dismounted, slowly, because his knees weren't what they used to be, and walked the bike inside, where the salesman was waiting with papers and a checking machine. The price was firm. $38,500. Marcus signed everything without reading it. The money would appear in his account by Friday. He didn't look back at the bike. If he looked back, he might cry, and he'd made himself a promise 50 years ago that he wouldn't waste water on weakness. Emma came home to an empty house at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Her grandfather's truck wasn't in the driveway. That wasn't unusual. Marcus often spent afternoons at the community center playing chess with other retirees, pretending he didn't have a granddaughter whose future had just become real and impossible all at once. She dropped her backpack by the kitchen door, checked her phone for messages, nothing, and headed upstairs to her room. That's where she found the envelope. It was plain, white, handwritten. Her name on the front in Marcus's careful, deliberate script, Emma. Inside was a check for $38,000 and a note written on lined paper, the words slightly uneven but fierce with intention. "Go change the world, kiddo. I'll be fine." Grandpa Emma's hands started shaking before her brain caught up to what she was seeing. $38,000. Her grandfather's entire savings, maybe more. That was the Harley money. She ran downstairs and called his cell. 4 rings, then his voicemail. "You've reached Marcus. Leave a message." "Grandpa, what did you do? Call me back, please." He called her back at 6:15 p.m. His voice was calm, the way it always was when he'd already made a decision and didn't want to be talked out of it. "Before you say anything, what did you do?" Emma's voice cracked. "What I should have done the day you were born. I made sure you'd have what you needed." "The Harley." Silence. That silence was worse than any lie. "It's just a bike, Em. You're my legacy. Not chrome, not engines. You." She cried then, standing in his kitchen with the check clutched in her hand, while her grandfather told her about the dealership, about the test drive he'd taken that morning, about how peaceful he'd felt the moment he knew it was gone. He told her it didn't hurt the way he thought it would. He told her it was the easiest decision he'd ever made. What he didn't tell her was that at night in the dark of his bedroom, he still reached for the sound of his own engine and found only silence. The Iron Brothers Motorcycle Club had a group chat that nobody under 30 understood, but everybody over 50 checked obsessively. It existed on an encrypted platform, updated 3 times a day, with run schedules, road conditions, and the small liturgy of men who'd chosen family over blood. Danny Russo, the chapter president, was scrolling through his phone Tuesday night when he saw the post from Kevin Hartsock, one of the older members. "Ran into Marcus at the dealership today. He sold the Harley." The responses came fast. First confusion, then the slower, heavier realization that something significant had shifted. Marcus Webb's Harley wasn't just a machine, it was institutional memory. Marcus had been riding with the Iron Brothers since 1994, back when the club was smaller, meaner, more desperate. He'd been there through the drought years, the police harassment, the federal investigation that nearly dissolved them. He'd earned his cuts through loyalty and sacrifice, and that bike had been his banner. Danny called Marcus directly. The phone rang twice before the old man picked up. "Marcus, what the hell happened?" There was a pause, not evasive, just the pause of a man choosing his words carefully. Then Marcus told him about Emma, about Berkeley, about the gap between dreams and possibility. Danny listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, there was another long pause. "You sold your Harley for college tuition. I sold my Harley for my granddaughter's future." Danny understood. That was the thing about the Iron Brothers. They were riders, yes, but they were also fathers, uncles, grandfathers. They understood sacrifice because they'd all made it. They'd chosen brotherhood over wealth, loyalty over comfort, principle over security, and they recognized that impulse in Marcus. That willingness to burn your own life for someone else's light. How much did you get? Danny asked. Enough. I didn't ask if it was enough. I asked how much. 38.5? She needs 40. I know. $1,800. I know, Danny. Danny hung up without saying goodbye. He opened the group chat and posted a single message. Church, midnight, mandatory. The responses came in within seconds, a cascade of on it and present and already riding. Because when the Iron Brothers called church, you came. No questions, no excuses. And now I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The warehouse on Maricopa Avenue had been the Iron Brothers Chapel for 16 years. It wasn't fancy. Concrete floor, string lights hung from the rafters, a long wooden bar salvaged from a dive bar that closed in 2003. On the walls hung photographs, decades of rides, weddings, funerals, the visual history of men who'd chosen each other. Motorcycles began arriving at 11:30 p.m. First came Danny and his inner circle, 6 riders with full cuts, patches earned through years of loyalty. Then came the others, mechanics and landscapers, nurses and construction workers, men in their 60s and 70s who'd been riding since the 70s, and younger brothers in their 30s who'd grown up around the mythology of the Iron Brothers. By 12:15 a.m., there were 43 bikes parked outside the warehouse. The rumble of engines had drawn neighbors out onto their porches, confused, wary, but ultimately indifferent. The bikers came every month for church. Nobody called the cops anymore. Inside, Danny stood at the head of the bar, and the room fell silent. These men understood ceremony, the weight of ritual. When Danny spoke, they listened. Marcus Webb sold his Harley yesterday, and he began. He sold the bike he's owned for 34 years. He sold his freedom so his granddaughter could have hers, so she could go to Berkeley, so she could change the world. The room was completely still. Now, that's not the Iron Brothers' way to let an old brother ride alone. That's not who we are. Danny pulled out his phone and set it on the bar. The screen displayed a fundraising page he'd created 20 minutes earlier. Iron Brothers for Emma Webb. Goal, $1, $800. We're gonna fix this, he said, not because we pity Marcus, because we respect him, because that's what family does, and we are family. He started the donations himself, $1,000. Then the chapter vice president added $500. Then the treasurer added $300. By the time the bottle was passed around the room, they'd gathered $2,300 in cash, Venmo transfers, and promises. But Danny wasn't done. He'd made a call to the National Iron Brothers organization, chapters in California, Nevada, Colorado, Utah, Arizona. He told them about Marcus, about the sacrifice, about a man who'd chosen love over legacy. And within 2 hours, confirmations started coming back. We're in. By 2:00 a.m., the total had reached $5,800. By 4:00 a.m., when the last chapter confirmed their contribution, the total was $37,000, more than enough to cover the remaining gap, more than enough to replace the Harley, more than enough to tell Marcus Webb that his sacrifice had not gone unnoticed by the only family that mattered. Marcus didn't know anything about the midnight gathering. He was asleep in his small house, the kind of sleep that comes after you've made a decision that empties you completely. He didn't dream. He simply existed in darkness, suspended between one life and the next. His phone rang at 5:47 a.m. It was Danny. "Put on your colors and meet us at the diner on 7th. Danny, it's not even 6. You heard me. Full colors. 1 hour. Marcus hung up, confused but obedient. The Iron Brothers didn't make requests at 5 in the morning unless something mattered. He pulled on his vest, the leather worn soft with age, the patches faded but honored. The cut was his identity, the visible proof that he belonged to something larger than himself. He hadn't planned to wear it today. After selling the Harley, wearing the colors felt like a lie. But he put it on anyway. The diner parking lot was already half full when he arrived. Not just bikes, but vehicles, trucks, cars, the full spread of a motorcycle club's extended family. He recognized faces: Danny, Kevin, the Ramirez brothers, Sandra, who ran the tire shop, Tommy, who'd been in the club since the 80s. Then he saw them coming in, from the north, from the south, from the desert highways. Motorcycles, dozens of them, 50, 70, 100 bikes rolling in perfect formation, the sound like distant thunder approaching. Marcus stood frozen, his old hands trembling. The formation pulled into the parking lot, and the engines cut out one by one until silence fell. Then Danny stepped forward with a helmet in his hands, not old, not worn, but new, top of the line, midnight blue, just like his old Harley. "You didn't think we were going to let you stop riding," Danny said. Behind him, a modified Harley rolled slowly into view. It was identical to Marcus's. Same year, same model, same deep blue finish. But the seat was new, the engine recently rebuilt, and on the back, a hand-painted memorial read, "For the old man who taught us what family means." Marcus's legs almost went out from under him. "This is from all of us," Danny continued. "Every chapter from here to California sent money. Every brother who ever shared a road with you wanted a piece of this. You didn't raise yourself alone, Marcus. None of us did. We raised each other, and we're not about to let you stop now." The 100 bikers formed a circle around them, and Marcus, for the first time in his life in front of the Brotherhood, let himself cry. The paperwork took 3 hours. The new bike wasn't just a motorcycle, it was a legal entity, transferred to Marcus's name through a Byzantine chain of Brotherhood logic that ensured no taxes, no fees, no government interference. The Iron Brothers had learned how to move money and property through their own systems decades ago, and this was the kind of transaction they did with ease. By 9:80 a.m., Marcus was officially the owner of a bike that was worth more than anything he'd ever possessed, except his house. He sat on it in the diner parking lot, his hands on the handlebars, his eyes closed. Emma called at 9:47 a.m. "Grandpa, what is happening? I have messages from like 50 people I don't even know congratulating me on scholarship funding. There's a fundraising page with $60,000 on it." Marcus opened his eyes. "Well," he said slowly, "you might have inherited more than just a college fund." He told her about the midnight gathering, about the brothers he'd ridden with for 30 years, about a community that didn't let its members sacrifice alone. He told her about the new Harley, about how the old one wasn't really gone. It had just been transformed into something bigger. "Grandpa, this is insane." "Yeah," he said, and he was smiling now. "Yeah, it is. Please like this video. If you believe in the power of brotherhood and sacrifice, your support means everything." "Your school is paid for," Marcus continued. "All of it. Housing, books, everything. You can focus on your studies without working 3 jobs. That was the whole point. I wanted you free to become everything you're supposed to be." But the Harley, The Harley is still mine, baby girl. They just made it better. And now I get to ride toward your future instead of away from my past. That's not a loss. That's the best trade I've ever made." After Emma hung up, Marcus sat on the new bike and felt the weight of it settle into his bones. It was heavier than his old one, newer, but already it was becoming familiar. His hands knew where to grip. His body remembered the balance. Danny appeared beside him, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "She okay?" Danny asked. "She's more than okay," Marcus said. "She's free." "That's what we do," Danny said simply. "We make each other free." They stood in the parking lot as the morning sun climbed higher, warming the desert, burning off the chill of the night ride. Marcus could still hear the engines in his memory, that 100-strong rumble of brotherhood, of men saying without words that they had each other's backs. That sacrifice wasn't meant to be solitary. That love was something that multiplied when you shared it with family. He looked at the helmet Danny had given him, then back at the bike. "Tell them thank you," he said finally. "They know," Danny replied. "That's what brotherhood means." October arrived with the kind of heat that only Arizona understood. Dry, relentless, the sky a bleached blue that burned your retinas if you stared too long. Marcus had spent the last 3 months riding, not just around Phoenix. He'd taken the new Harley out on the same routes he'd hidden as a younger man, the desert loops and mountain passes that had taught him how to breathe. But now he rode with purpose. He rode past his old factory, where the building still stood, but the business had moved overseas 40 years ago. He rode past the street where he'd first met his wife, where they'd fallen in love, in the cab of a pickup truck, with the radio playing something neither of them could quite remember. He rode back to being alive. Emma sent him pictures from Berkeley, her in the library, her in her dorm room, her standing in front of Sproul Hall with her arms spread wide like she was trying to embrace the entire campus. "I'm doing it, Grandpa," her text read. "I'm actually doing it." He'd ridden up to California twice already, once to help her move into her dorm, once just because the road called him north. The Iron Brothers had connections in every chapter, and there'd been a welcome in every town. Fresh coffee in Barstow, a place to sleep in Fresno, a hot meal in San Jose. The Brotherhood wasn't just about bikes. It was about infrastructure, about the knowledge that you were never alone as long as you wore the colors. On one of those rides, Marcus had stopped at UC Berkeley, just to sit on the bike and watch students walking across campus. Emma had come running out of the library, seen him, and nearly crashed into the bike with her embrace. She'd cried and hugged him for 5 minutes straight, while her friends watched and asked who the old man on the Harley was. "That's my grandfather," she'd told them, and there'd been pride in her voice that Marcus had felt like a physical blow, the good kind, the kind that reminded him why he'd let the old Harley go. Now, in October, Marcus planned his last ride of the season, a 100-mile run with the Iron Brothers, out to the desert and back, the kind of ride that reminded you why you'd chosen to live hard and love harder. He checked the bike one final time. Oil, tire pressure, brakes. Everything was perfect. The Harley had been maintained with the kind of obsessive care that only the Brotherhood could provide. Every part had been blessed by someone who understood that a motorcycle wasn't just transportation, it was prayer. The parking lot at the Iron Brothers Chapel filled slowly as evening fell. 63 bikes this time, not as many as the dawn gathering, but every one of them a commitment. These were the core riders, the ones who understood that being part of the Brotherhood meant showing up, Again and again, even when the romance faded and it was just about loyalty. Marcus rode in at 6:15 p.m. and the parking lot erupted. Not with noise. The Brotherhood didn't do noise anymore. They'd learned to find power in silence, but with recognition. Men nodded, approached, clasped his shoulder. Some didn't say anything. Some said everything with just a look. Danny was waiting by the bar, where a small gathering had assembled around a table. On the table sat a leather-bound book, aged and beautiful, and next to it, a pen. "We got something for you," Danny said, or rather, for Emma. Marcus opened the book slowly. The first page was blank except for a single handwritten line at the top, "Promises we keep." On the second page, there was an entry written in careful script. Marcus Webb sold his Harley so his granddaughter could fly. In return, the Iron Brothers Motorcycle Club pledges to ensure that Emma Webb's education, her safety, and her future remain protected by the Brotherhood. We promise that she will never face the world alone. This is our oath. This is our legacy. The Iron Brothers National Organization. Below it were signatures, dozens of them. Members from every chapter, from Arizona to California to Nevada to Colorado. Each name a promise, a commitment, a piece of armor. "What is this?" Marcus whispered. "Insurance," Danny said. "The kind that matters. Emma's going to be part of the Brotherhood now, whether she rides or not. She's blood family to us. And that means anyone who tries to hurt her, anyone who tries to stop her, answers to us." "Danny, this isn't about violence, old man. It's about presence. It's about making sure that girl knows she's protected, that her education matters because we decided it matters, that her future belongs to all of us now." Marcus's hands were shaking as he picked up the pen and signed his name at the bottom of the page. His signature looked tiny compared to all the others, but it was there. It was real. "Thank you," he said, and he meant it with the whole architecture of his being. "That's what family does," Danny replied. 6 months later, on a Tuesday morning in April, Marcus received a package from Berkeley. The box was small, wrapped in brown craft paper with his name written in Emma's handwriting. Careful, deliberate. The way she'd learned to write in 3rd grade when he'd taught her that letters mattered because they carried intention. Inside was a framed photograph. Emma stood in front of the UC Berkeley Library, the afternoon sun catching her hair, one hand resting on the seat of the new Harley, like she was making a promise to it. But what made Marcus's breath catch was the vest. She was wearing a leather vest, not a full cut, not the colors of a rider, but something better, something that belonged entirely to her. A custom-made piece that Danny had commissioned from a leather worker in Scottsdale. On the back, embroidered in red thread against black leather, were the Iron Brothers insignia, and below it, in flowing script, Grandpa's granddaughter, protected, promised. Marcus held the frame for 10 minutes without moving. His hands were steady, but his eyes weren't. He hung it on his bedroom wall, directly across from his bed. It was the first thing he saw every morning when he opened his eyes. Emma's face, the Harley, the promise made visible. And every night before sleep took him, he looked at it again and let himself believe that he'd made the right choice. That trading 34 years of solitude on chrome had been the equation that balanced everything. The old Harley had found its own form of immortality. Danny had taken it to the Iron Brothers Chapel 2 weeks after the dawn gathering. He'd mounted it on the wall above the bar, not displayed like a museum piece, but positioned like a saint in a cathedral. The light hung above it at precisely the right angle, so that the chrome caught fire at certain times of day, turning the bike into something almost religious in its luminescence. Beneath it, a brass plaque had been installed, in honor of Marcus Webb, who taught us that true sacrifice is love in action, who chose his granddaughter's wings over his own road, who showed us that the deepest cuts we wear are not on our vests but in our hearts. The Iron Brothers remember. The Iron Brothers ride eternal. Men would stand in front of that bike during church and feel something shift in their chests. Not sadness. The brotherhood didn't traffic in sadness, but recognition, reverence, the understanding that they'd witnessed something sacred, a man choosing love so completely that it had reverberated through an entire organization. Marcus was 74 now, moving into that territory where the body began its slow negotiation with gravity and time. His knees didn't bend the way they used to. His hands ached sometimes when the weather turned cold, phantom pain from the factory work he'd done 40 years ago, joints remembering their old injuries. Some mornings he woke up and it took him 10 minutes just to get out of bed, his body checking in with all its various failures. But he still took the Harley out every Sunday morning, without fail. He'd developed a route, a 100-mile loop that started at his house, wound through the North Phoenix neighborhoods where he'd lived his entire adult life, then pushed out into the desert. The road climbed into the mountains, where the air was thinner and cleaner, where you could see forever if you knew how to look. He'd ride past the old quarry, where he'd taken his first girlfriend in 1969, past the diner where he'd learned his wife was pregnant, past the hospital where she died. Every location was a memory made of asphalt and time. On these Sunday rides, Marcus wasn't thinking about his own life anymore. He was thinking about Emma, about how she'd started her first job at an environmental non-profit in Oakland, working on policy initiatives that would determine how California managed water during the coming droughts. She was changing the world exactly the way she'd promised. She was doing it with the kind of quiet ferocity that reminded him of himself, the part of himself that had never quite given up, even when everything suggested that giving up was the only reasonable response. He'd ridden up to Oakland twice more to see her. The Iron Brothers had connections in the California chapters. Motorcycle clubs were networks of loyalty and mutual support that existed parallel to the official world. There'd been a welcome in every town, a place to sleep in Barstow where the proprietor of a small motel had refused his money and given him instead a hot breakfast and the phone number of his brother in Fresno. Coffee in Fresno, hot and strong, and served by a woman whose daughter had married a brother from the Tucson chapter. A home-cooked meal in San Jose from a retired Iron Brother who understood what it meant to be old and still riding. The brotherhood took care of its own, and by extension their family. On his last trip to see Emma, Marcus had ridden up to UC Berkeley not to visit her dorm, but just to sit on the Harley in the parking lot near Sproul Hall and watch the students walking across campus. He'd stayed there for an hour just watching, kids with backpacks, kids on skateboards, kids with dreams written so clearly on their faces that you could read them from 30 feet away. Then Emma had come running out of the library. She'd seen the Harley first, then her grandfather, and she'd nearly crashed into the bike with the force of her embrace. She'd cried and held him for 5 minutes straight, her arms around his neck, her face buried in his shoulder. Her friends had watched from a distance, trying to understand the relationship between this old man on the motorcycle and their friend who'd never mentioned having a grandfather who rode. "That's my grandfather," she'd told them when she finally released him. And there'd been pride in her voice that Marcus had felt like a physical blow, the good kind, the kind that reminded him why he'd let the old Harley go without looking back. He's a member of a motorcycle club, the Iron Brothers. They're like my family too now. Her friends had nodded like they understood, but they didn't. Not really. How could they? They hadn't grown up watching their grandfather choose solitude over connection. They hadn't seen what it looked like when a man decided that his own comfort was less important than his granddaughter's future. Now, riding alone through the desert on these Sunday mornings, Marcus felt the weight of that choice settle into him like good earth. Every mile was a conversation between his hands and the handlebars. Every curve was a prayer he didn't know how to say in words. The wind moved through the open spaces of his chest where his heart had learned to live bigger than his body could contain. He thought about legacy. Not the things you left behind when you died, but the things you built while you were still alive. Emma wasn't going to become a full-time rider. She had her own path, her own calling. The environment didn't care that her grandfather had been part of a motorcycle club. The policy she was writing didn't become more important because she wore a vest with the Iron Brothers insignia. But she wore the vest anyway. Once a month, she'd ride the Harley herself. Not the new one Marcus had been given, but her own bike. A smaller machine that Danny had helped her choose, something nimble and responsive that matched her own energy. And when she rode, sometimes alone, sometimes with members of the Iron Brothers who made sure she was safe, she carried something forward. She carried the understanding that sacrifice wasn't weakness, that choosing to give up your own comfort for someone else's future was the highest form of strength. That family wasn't just blood, it was choice. It was commitment. It was showing up again and again, even when no one was watching, and no one would know if you didn't. When it came time for her to have her own children, if that time came, Emma would tell them about the old man who sold his Harley so they could exist at all. She'd tell them about the brotherhood that had caught his sacrifice and transformed it into something that lasted longer than any individual life. She'd teach them that love was the most practical thing in the world, that it had weight and substance and the capacity to move mountains, or at least to move 100 motorcycles across a desert at dawn. Marcus rode past the old factory one more time on that Sunday, 5 months after the gift of the new Harley. The building was still there, though the business had moved overseas decades ago. He parked the bike and sat on it, not moving, just remembering the 30 years he'd spent in that place, the machinery that had shaped his hands, the men he'd worked alongside who were mostly dead now or retired to small houses in neighborhoods he never visited. He'd spent a third of his life there, earning enough to survive but not enough to truly live. And then he'd gotten the Harley, and somehow that chrome and engine had rewritten the equation. It had made the factory years bearable because there was something to ride toward when the shift ended. He looked down at his hands on the handlebars, weathered, spotted, the joints thickened with age. These hands had built things. These hands had held his wife while she died. These hands had held Emma when she was born, tiny and red and furious with the injustice of existence. These hands had signed a check for $38,000, and in doing so had signed his name into the permanent record of the brotherhood. He started the engine and rode toward home, toward Sunday dinner with Danny and some of the other brothers who'd begun gathering at a Mexican restaurant on Central Avenue every week. The tradition had started without anyone formally deciding it should, just men showing up because they understood that you didn't have to work to be part of something. Sometimes you just had to show up. Sometimes you just had to choose, again and again, to keep riding. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to see more stories of brotherhood, sacrifice, and the power of keeping your promises. The Iron Brothers ride eternal.